Yeah. All right. Is it 7:30? Online. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started because there's this long pause while we all wait. Well, first of all, welcome to the December meeting of the Carter Center Board of Councilors. It's great to see people in person, and for all of those who are participating remotely, welcome. My name is Sham Reddy, and I'm chair of the board. This is our last meeting for 2021, which serves as a nice bookend to some exciting work done at the Carter Center all year long, which we'll hear a little bit more about later in the program. First, I'd like to welcome members of Atlanta's diplomatic community, but let's hold our applause for the whole group as we get through their introductions. In the meantime, we would like our diplomats to stand when called. First, we have the Consul General of the Netherlands, Ard van der Vorst. We have the Consul General of Japan, Kazuyuki Takeuchi. And we have the Consul General of Belgium, Michael Garabetsov. The Consul of Canada and the Acting Head of Mission, Kirk de Good, the Senior Consultant for the Hong Kong Information Office of Atlanta, Jean Hanratty, and from the World Affairs Council of Atlanta, its President, Ambassador Charles Shapiro. Have I missed any Consuls General? Let's please extend a warm welcome to our diplomatic corps. We also have several guests today, but too many to introduce individually. So let's just give them a general warm welcome. You know, we're all sorry to miss President and Mrs. Carter for our meeting, but I do want to introduce several other key people from the Carter Center. Would you mind standing after I call your name? First, from the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library, we welcome Director Dr. Meredith Evans. And from the Carter Center, we welcome Paige Alexander, our CEO, and Jason Carter, our Chairman of the Board of Trustees. And now on to our agenda and the Carter Center's 3 program speakers. Helen Robinson, who's an Associate Director for Public Policy in the Mental Health Program, will report on mental health parity in Georgia. Next, we'll hear from Hampton Stahl, a Senior Program Associate with the Conflict Resolution Program, who will speak on the peace building and technology work that we're doing. And then we'll hear from Lauren Kent Delaney, the Director of the Education Program, where she will introduce 2 student interns who will tell us about their experiences working on Carter Center programs. And finally, Paige Alexander and Jason Carter will offer year-end remarks and take questions. Next, to our first speaker, Helen Robinson. Helen joined the mental health program in 2020 and brought to bear her years of experience eliminating stigma and improving access to care for people with behavioral health disorders. As the Associate Director for Public Policy, Helen analyzes federal and state level policy that impacts mental health parity. She also convenes key stakeholders to advance evidence-based approaches to prevention, treatment, and health promotion. In addition, she leads the Georgia Parity Collaborative, a group of statewide stakeholders working to advance parity in insurance coverage for behavioral health in Georgia, while also representing the Carter Center's mental health program in national public policy coalitions. She earned her bachelor's degree from Davidson College and her master's degree in public affairs from Indiana University. Helen?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about the important topic of behavioral health parity. So what is parity in insurance coverage? Parity means that people with mental health and substance use conditions receive the same level of health insurance benefits as people with physical health conditions. And you'll hear we often use the term behavioral health to refer to both mental health and substance use conditions. Without parity, people are required to go out of network, pay out of pocket, pay higher copays, are limited to fewer visits for care, or are denied coverage for behavioral health treatment altogether because it is deemed not medically necessary, but without them being given an explanation. These practices that deny coverage or treat payment for behavioral health care differently send a strong message to those who are seeking that care that they are asking for something that is outside the norm. This contributes to stigma and is a form of discrimination. Former First Lady Rosalind Carter has been a champion for eliminating stigma against people living with mental illness and substance use disorders and advancing access to mental health care for over 50 years. As part of her advocacy work, Mrs. Carter played a role in the passage of the landmark Paul Wellstone and Pete Domenici Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act of 2008. MAPIA, as it is known, is federal legislation signed into law by President George W. Bush at the time, requiring insurers to cover treatment for mental health and substance use no more restrictively than treatment for illnesses of the body, such as diabetes and cancer. Insurance plans did not have to cover behavioral health treatment, but if they do, it must be covered in a comparable way to other medical treatment. And then, of course, when the Affordable Care Act later passed, behavioral health was included as an essential health benefit, meaning that most plans do offer behavioral health coverage and must comply with parity. Under Mrs. Carter's guidance, the Carter Center Mental Health Program continues her work to ensure full implementation and enforcement of parity in the United States. Here in Georgia, we are convening the Georgia Parity Collaborative, consisting of 30 statewide and national organizations who are working on a joint strategy to drive policy change for parity enforcement in Georgia. We're going to hear from a key partner of the mental health program who participates in our Georgia Parity Collaborative and who will talk to you about what economic leaders and employers can do to improve parity. Patrick J. Kennedy is a former U.S. representative and founder of the Kennedy Forum. During his time in Congress, he was the lead author of the landmark MAPIA federal parity law.
Hello, everyone. First, let me acknowledge the Board of Councilors at the Carter Center, and most of all, to acknowledge the great leadership of Mrs. Carter over many years, who has been our greatest champion for mental health. I was so honored to work with her when I was in Congress, seeking to pass this landmark bill called the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, which is really a medical version of civil rights. It basically says that you can no longer treat mental illness and addiction as separate from the rest of the healthcare system, because it would be unequal to treat it as such. And the example is in Georgia today, in spite of the bill being passed 10 years ago, in Georgia, if you have a mental illness or addiction, you're 8 times more likely to have to get cared for out of network, because insurance companies in your state have insufficient in-network capacity to meet the needs of your fellow Georgians. As payers in Georgia, you have an opportunity to tell your third-party administrator, your fully insured plan, that you demand that there be adequate in-network capacity so that people do not have to wait as long as they would otherwise have to wait for diabetes care or cardiovascular disease or cancer care to get treatment, and that those with mental illness and addiction can expect no greater access issues and no greater financial burden as a result of that access problem. So the work now to enforce the mental health parity law is increasing. What a worse time you can find to be not in compliance with parity when your workforce is desperately seeking more access to care. And that care not only will reduce your total disease burden, because we know that mental health reduces all other costs in healthcare, but good mental health also reduces absenteeism, presenteeism, reduces the churn that many of you as economic leaders and employers in Georgia are seeing currently with your current employment. And so for so many reasons, it makes sense for us to increase the proportion of our healthcare dollar that goes to mental health when we see the return on investment that it brings, not just in mental health, but in overall health and in worker productivity. That's the trifecta. So I look forward to working with the Carter Center in the future. We have so much in partnership with the Carter Center at the Kennedy Forum. We're tracking what each state is doing on a case law basis, regulatory basis, and a statutory basis. And I would encourage all of you to keep supporting what the Carter Center's advocating in terms of further enforcement of the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, so that your family and mine can expect to see the same urgency of care, the same access to care that we would expect if we were to receive care for any other illness of the body. Thank you so much, and have a great conference.
So you can see why Patrick Kennedy is a powerful voice, raising awareness about the importance of parity in Georgia and nationwide. And parity impacts access to treatment along the entire spectrum of need, all the way from those all-important prevention and early intervention services like you might see in a school-based behavioral health program for young people, to more intensive treatment. And when parity is not enforced, Georgians are unable to access treatment for themselves or their children that could prevent a crisis, or they are forced to navigate a confusing insurance system in the middle of a crisis. Many of you may have seen this local 11 Alive series that's been running about child access to behavioral health treatment. In this particularly heart-wrenching story, a mother is told by her insurance company to turn her child over to state custody so that the state would pay for the behavioral health treatment that the child needed because the insurance company would not. States are primarily responsible for monitoring parity compliance for many insurers. Now, the U.S. Department of Labor is responsible for those large employer self-funded plans, but the state's Department of Insurance is responsible for monitoring and enforcement of parity for private insurance plans that include individual, marketplace, small business, and large employer plans that are not self-funded. And we at the Carter Center Mental Health Program have been meeting with key Department of Insurance staff to talk to them about requesting that parity compliance data from the insurers that they regulate. Our Georgia Department of Community Health oversees our Medicaid care management organizations as well as our state child health insurance program. And we are working with them to ensure that they include parity provisions in their renewed CMO contracts in this coming year. So that administrative policy change is really important for parity enforcement, but we also need to educate our state legislators. We at the Mental Health Program spoke at a press conference recently at the state capitol about parity, and bipartisan legislators promised that 2022 will be the year for mental health in Georgia. It is encouraging that parity is a bipartisan priority, as the need for behavioral health treatment in Georgia will continue to increase due to pandemic-related anxiety, grief, depression, isolation, substance use, and as well as racial inequities. The Georgia Parity Collaborative provided expert recommendations to the state's very first Behavioral Health Reform and Innovation Commission, and the first-year report from that commission released earlier this year focuses on parity. We do expect a comprehensive bill to be filed soon in our state legislature, reflecting the recommendations from that first-year report. There is an unprecedented window of opportunity for us to make parity a reality in Georgia in this coming year. In addition to the commission report and this bipartisan support for parity. We also have in our state American Rescue Plan funding that could be used to build that enforcement infrastructure. We also have the 988 National Suicide Prevention Line, which will be rolling out this summer nationwide. When that line rolls out, we expect to see a great increase in the number of crisis calls coming in, and it really is going to shine a light on the question of where will we send people, and will their insurance pay for that needed treatment when they're referred. Parity is also linked to workforce shortages, and you're going to hear a lot about that in the coming year. It's a very urgent need in our state. If we had adequate and fair reimbursement for behavioral health treatment, we would be able to tackle that workforce shortage. The other reason that all the stars are aligning to make parity a reality is the fact that stigma is decreasing due to the pandemic, especially with young people. We are seeing more and more that everyone accepts that we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health, and that we cannot discriminate. You can be a part of this effort. First, educate yourselves and your family members about parity, which you're doing today. Prioritize mental health in your workplace. As you saw in Patrick Kennedy's talk, employees are struggling with the pandemic's impact, and employers can expand mental health benefits, including making sure there is access to in-network providers. Speak out against stigma in your own lives. Also, share the policy guide that's included in your packets with your state legislators. Make sure they know what parity is and that you think it should be a major focus this year. Help make 2022 the year for mental health in Georgia. And then we promise as a mental health program, we will take the lessons learned in this state nationally. We will make sure that other states and our national partners learn from our experiences here. And I want to leave you finally with this inspiring quote from Mrs. Carter. Making change is not easy, but we must always keep in mind what the struggle is about. The right of people to enjoy equal opportunity and equal treatment in all aspects of life, including physical and mental health care. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen, for all the work you're doing to promote and advance behavioral health. You know, behavioral health has always been kind of close to the heart for me because my mom is a psychiatrist, and Rosalind Carter is one of her heroes. So from my early days, as far back as I can remember, it was always front and center. So between that and my background in public health, I have a master's in public health from Emory University. I've leveraged that focus to really drive and promote mental health in my company. And so for the business leaders in the room and who are participating via simulcast, I would encourage you to do that. At the beginning of the pandemic, for example, HR, among other departments, reports to me, and we have over 2,000 employees across the country. We not only have expanded coverage internally within the health programs, but we rolled out a number of free benefits outside of insurance, such as unlimited telemedicine consultations and then a certain number of in-person visits. At the same time, there was communication coming from me where I was very, very open about behavioral health issues and encouraging people to go out and seek it if they need it on a very regular basis, both physically in terms of signage and things like that, on top of messaging from the highest levels of the organization. Interestingly enough, we had an uptick in participation because those continued efforts destigmatized access or reaching out for behavioral health. But at the same time, it was eye-opening because no matter how available and how free and how much we promoted it, the numbers were not as high as I would have expected them to be, given the fact that we were in the middle of a pandemic and I was hearing about lots of concerns through other channels in the organization. So I think it's just definitely one of those things that we have to double down on, and I would encourage all the leaders on the Board of Councilors to do that in their respective organizations. As you know, Helen, although you and your works team is important no matter the time, and as I've experienced over the last 2 years, is especially important during a global pandemic. So thank you for everything that you're doing. Our next speaker is Hampton Stahl, who returned to the Carter Center's Conflict Resolution Program in 2021 as a senior program associate, where he's been supporting the work of the Syria Conflict Mapping Project. He started as an intern with the project in 2015 and then joined the team after his internship. Outside of the center, Hampton has studied political extremism, local food systems, and post-combat response across multiple contexts. He earned his bachelor's degree from Davidson College and his master's of development practice from Emory University. Hampton?
Thanks so much. Okay, hey everyone, my name is Hampton Stahl, and I am the Senior Program Associate with the newly formed Data and Analysis team within the Conflict Resolution Program within the Carter Center. So it's kind of a Matreska doll of roles here. I'm going to talk to you about something that my team has been working on for a couple of years now that I'm personally very excited about, that's very important to me, and that is the issue of unexploded ordnance in Syria, where our project is focused. So many of you probably already know about the Syria Conflict Mapping Project. It was formed back in 2012, 2013. We are well known within a number of different spheres of those who work on Syria for our long-term and high-fidelity data. And in addition to this data, we're known for using our data in really important and cutting-edge ways and connecting this through the partnerships that we're able to forge through that trust. Now, I got a nice introduction about graduating from Davidson College, and right after that, I joined the Carter Center. So this little red bracket here starts in the summer of 2015 when I joined. I left for a master's degree in late 2019, and I have returned a month and a half ago, and I'm really excited about what happened while I was gone that I'm coming back to. So before we get into the real bulk of this, I want to define what an unexploded ordnance is, or a UXO. I'll use both of these terms throughout this presentation. This picture here is from the UN, from a removal mission to take unexploded ordnance and remove them after combat. You'll notice that there are multiple different shapes of things here. There are mortars, there are hand grenades, there are artillery shells, there are bombs dropped from planes. It's a whole slew of different artifacts that have been dug up from the ground. You'll also notice that they are quite heavily rusted, and that's not because the metal is cheap, although a lot of times the metal on these rounds is cheap. It's because they've been there for a long time. Unexploded ordnance sit waiting for someone unfortunate enough to come across them for years, decades even. And I should be very clear that just because a bomb didn't explode when it launched, it doesn't mean that it's inert. There's all kinds of tragic stories from Syria, from elsewhere, of children coming across unexploded ordnance and losing an arm. There is built into every arms contract a understanding that explosives, weapons, will have a failure rate. Usually it's due to mechanics, and that rate for the US government is usually 10% is kind of the expectation. However, when the weapon systems are old, when they are crewed by teams who really don't know what they're doing when they're launching the weapons, that number can be much, much higher. So in order to illustrate what this 10% rate, and another rate that I think is probably more appropriate, let's assume that these dots up here are the 50 or so explosive munitions that are used over the course of a battle on a front line in a single day in Syria. And 50 is, it's kind of an arbitrary number here. It could be much above this, it could be below it. 10% of this 50 is this 5 here. This is a single day, single battle, single front line, 5 munitions that didn't go off. However, given those variables that I mentioned, namely the age and type of munition and the crews that are crewing them, a 10% failure rate is probably a good bit too low. So still being conservative, a 30% failure rate looks like this. So that's 15 munitions of those 50. And 15 may not sound like a lot, but let's keep in mind that there are almost 4,000 days since the beginning of the Syrian conflict. We're at 3,916 today. And that's not to say that every single day has this in every single territory. That wouldn't be good math. So the Carter Center engaged using our data in doing studies using good math. So these are the 4 non-technical reports that we released last year, covering the conflict from 2013 through 2019, looking at explosives ordnance use throughout the 4 regions of Syria. So that's southern Syria, the capital region, the northwest, and the northeast in order. The 2013 to 2019 period is the period of the highest concentration of conflict, but we are currently working on a 5th report covering up through 2020. There was, just for those of you who aren't following the Syrian conflict super closely, there was a ceasefire nationwide in 2020 that has slowed the pace of the conflict a lot. We require a series of different partnerships to really do this work well. The first of which is with the Armed Conflict Location Event Data Project, or ACLED, their logo here on the left. We sort of helped them develop a methodology and bring it into Syria a few years ago, and that's paid off because it means that we have to spend less time collecting conflict data. However, their methodology, and anyone who works in data knows this, the methodology is often kind of aligned differently, means that they code for a single point, a single day, a single line in a spreadsheet. So these 8 dots here would be, for example, 8 conflict events, 8 battles in a region of Syria. However, they don't code for how many explosives ordnance are used. They'll sort of in the notes say there were mortar shells launched, like that kind of detail. So we reached out to our partners at Microsoft, and using artificial intelligence, we have developed a tool using natural language processing to sort of tease out some of those events that maybe we're missing, so that we get a graph that looks more like this on the right, where those cases where a lot more munitions are used can be scaled as such. Our data is not just sort of a raw count of munitions use. We're able to do this both by the type of munition via how it was launched. Bombs from airplanes look very different from mortars, look very different from hand grenades, look very different from IEDs. So the orange here is the ground launched, and the blue here is air launched, and this is Damascus and rural Damascus, the area around the capital. But we're also able to look very, very closely within a city. So these are the neighborhoods of Aleppo. The darker the red is the higher the concentration of unexploded ordnance using our sort of analytical method. But it's not just close data that we can look at. We have data to now look nationwide so that we can inform where the highest concentration of unexploded ordnance are. It would be a little bit messy for me to show the full nationwide scale up here on the screen, so I'm just showing you southern Syria here. So this is the 3 southern governorates. And you can see that there is sort of a geographic spread of where the higher concentration of unexploded ordnance likely is. So I mentioned this 10% to 30% failure rate, and what that means is that from our first 4 non-technical studies, we found that at a minimum, there's just shy of 27,000 unexploded ordnance across Syria. It's way more likely that 80,000, the 30% number, is still an underestimate, and this is kind of a really abstract number to even mention, but just keep in mind that every single one of these munitions has the ability to take a life, maim, sort of hinder the things that are really important in this period in Syria, which are sort of detailed here. So I've mentioned that UXOs can take a life, they can maim people. A lot of munitions are intended to take soldiers out of combat, mostly through removing a limb. But it can also disrupt the sort of crucial strategic work that the Carter Center is involved in, namely that which pertains to reconstruction and development. So not being able to use schools, not being able to rebuild buildings, not being able to till soil for being afraid of hitting a landmine. There's all kinds of other sort of intersecting, overlapping impacts that UXOs have. And then lastly, humanitarian aid is disrupted by UXOs and the environment. This is kind of an underappreciated bit about unexploded ordnance, and it's a little bit secondary compared to the human cost of explosive going off. But I showed you the photo of the rust. Explosive munitions do have the chance to leach into the soil, and in some really bad cases into the groundwater, making the ability to use that land for agriculture even harder. So, two of the major hindrances that we see within the case studies of clearing UXOs, we've looked at Mozambique and we've looked at southern Iraq namely, is that it is extremely time intensive and it's expensive. And that's where I think the Carter Center advantage is really crucial, because we can help direct those resources to cut down on those two hurdles. It's still going to be expensive, it's still going to take a long time, but using our completely novel method, we're able to sort of direct resources where they need to be through the partnerships that we've developed and are continuing to develop. It's also, the Carter Center is a trusted resource across all of those who engage in Syria. And we have a position where we can highlight this need. There's not a lot of conversation going on about mine clearing, about UXOs, and we're in a position where we can raise that to the international community, to the donor community, and to governments. And this last bit, I think, is really sort of crucial for the work that the Carter Center does and how we make sure that our projects are working together. The Syria Conflict Mapping Project is the sort of research component of a political engagement to sort of help with conflict resolution in Syria. And the UXO problem is one which is seen as apolitical by warring parties and their supporters, namely their international supporters. So while Western governments and Russia may not agree on a lot of things in Syria, we believe that they will agree on UXO clearance, and that will be a great point of common ground for us to help foster. So thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Hampton. It's always nice and exciting to see the Carter Center bringing technology and conflict resolution together. You know, listening to you, really, something dawned on me. So my parents immigrated from India, so I'm a son of Indian immigrants who really raised me and my brother in a very strict household. At the same time that they were encouraging us to work hard, study hard, they were also telling us to give back. And they usually frame that up through the lens of their journey to America. Harkening back to my mom and dad used to always tell us that Gandhi gave them inspired them to search for the American dream, and Dr. King gave them the ability to live out the American dream once they came to America. And so we were always raised to appreciate the fact that we were born on American soil and that we were native-born Americans while they were pursuing their U.S. citizenship, and that formed the foundation of instilling in us this deep commitment to not only contribute to the economic fabric but give back to the community. So kind of framing that up, there's context why I'm telling you this story is we have always appreciated being in America, and a lot of times I think we sometimes take for granted what we have here. And listening to you, Hampton, it dawned on me that in many countries in Africa, countries in Southeast Asia, even in places like Great Britain and France and places in Eastern Europe, Russia, Ukraine, people have to worry about unexploded ordnance. We don't ever have to worry about that here in the U.S., which is incredibly meaningful to me. I never thought that that thought would cross my mind. And so now, Hampton, you've given me another reason to appreciate having been born on U.S. soil. So thank you for that presentation, and thank you for all the work that you're doing on the mapping project and unexploded ordnance. Our next speaker is Lauren Kent Delaney, who joined the Carter Center as a Director of Educational Programs in 2005. She oversees the marketing, recruitment, and supervision of the approximately 100 interns and graduate students each year who work in peace, health, and operations at the Carter Center. Before joining the center, Lauren held several positions in the Division of Campus Life at Emory University, and prior to her time at Emory, she held campus life positions at Georgia Tech and Arizona State University. She earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Wisconsin at Whitewater and her master's in higher education from Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. Lauren?
Good morning. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's my pleasure to talk about the work of educational programs. We have 3 intern sessions each year, fall, spring, and summer. The fall and spring sessions are 15 weeks, the summer session is 10 weeks. During each of these sessions, we accept about 30 interns that work 20 hours a week in peace, health, as well as the operational areas all listed here. Eligibility for this internship extends to college juniors, seniors, graduate students, and people who have completed their degree in the last 24 months. In addition, we have 6 to 8 graduate assistants each year that are with us for 9 to 12 months because they're working on things that cannot be accomplished within the parameters of an intern session. Over the years, the Carter Center has had 3,517 interns from 109 countries that speak a total of 173 languages. President Carter always loved those statistics. I would be remiss if I didn't include them. The goal of the intern program is to provide a substantive learning experience that encourages people to explore career options and attain professional skills that combine their academic studies with practical application. We start each session with orientation so that the interns and graduate assistants can learn about the history and the mission of the Carter Center. In addition to the programmatic work, we strive to provide a well-rounded experience. Educational Programs offers professional development speaker series that typically highlight a program initiative, such as a briefing on our work in Sudan, or a skill set like professional writing. Every session, we hold a career panel so that it encourages the interns and graduate assistants to network with the professional staff, as well as we also have a small group question and answer session with Paige Alexander. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we have hosted 135 interns. Most of them have never met their supervisors in person. They've never been inside the Carter Center or had the opportunity to work from the Peace Pavilion like these folks. And they have never visited President and Mrs. Carter's beloved hometown of Plains, Georgia. However, they have accomplished remarkable things. As a part of the career conversation event recently, I learned about an intern who was working on a project in Liberia that focuses on police accountability. Another who has talked about her contributions to a proposal to USAID, and yet another who conducted virtual training on our e-procurement systems on her own with the staff in South Sudan. I'm continually impressed with the work ethic of our interns and graduate assistants and their willingness to reach beyond their comfort zone. I value the supervisors who are able to motivate and mentor interns, as well as encourage them to be deliberate about their career path. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, some of them come back as staff members. This morning, it is my pleasure to introduce to you two of our departing fall interns. I'm excited to introduce you to Bernardo Pinto and Ashley Brookings. Bernardo?
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. My name's Bernardo Pinto, and I'm an intern with the Democracy Program here at the Carter Center. I'd like to start by thanking the Carter Center and Ms. Delaney for providing me the opportunity to speak at this meeting. This is very special to me because being an undergraduate student at Georgia Tech and having studied at the Parity School, which is just around the corner, I know very well the story and the legacy of the Carter Center. In fact, it was the center that inspired me to study international affairs and pursue a career in diplomacy. When I was a junior in high school, my class was invited to attend a presentation here at the Carter Center on the Middle East, specifically on combating ISIS. And following that presentation, I immediately knew that I not only wanted to study international affairs, but that one day I wanted to become an intern here at the Carter Center. Thankfully for me, 4 years after that presentation, I've had the opportunity to not do only one, but 2 sessions as an intern here. These past 7 months at the Carter Center have been extremely challenging, but rewarding as well. I've enjoyed every single minute of it. Looking back on my internship, my favorite aspect has been the people. Everyone that I've met and I've worked with has been super helpful, knowledgeable, and open to discussing anything. What's amazing to me is that this seems to be common feedback. All of the other interns I've spoken with in both of my sessions have said the exact same thing. Another important aspect for me is the trust and confidence that the supervisors instill on the interns. I remember that on one of my first days at the Carter Center, my supervisors welcomed me by presenting a 30-page report on the Honduras primary elections that needed to be edited in both Spanish and English. Then they asked me to edit all of the graphics and the visuals of the report. Now, I've never considered myself particularly good at graphic design, nor had I great experience using computer programs of that kind. However, both of my supervisors encouraged me and gave me their trust to complete this project. Their support not only motivated me to complete this assignment, but it motivated me throughout the entirety of my internship here. As part of the democracy program, I've been fortunate enough to have participated in 3 elections: the Zambia general elections, the Honduras general elections, and also the Venezuela regional and municipal elections. I remember that one time, Dr. David Carroll asked me what my favorite part of the internship had been to that point, and I said that it was the excitement of the tight deadlines leading up to the elections. Beyond just the adrenaline of the electoral process, I believe that the pre- and post-election periods were the times that I most learned during my internship. For example, in the lead up to the Zambia elections, my supervisors asked me to create a map with various key locations in Lusaka. As I stated before, I've never had that much experience using computer programs. However, within 1 day of receiving that assignment, I was already using Power BI and ArcGIS to complete the map. This shows how, above all, the Carter Center was a learning and growing space for me. As a soccer player, my coaches always tell me to stay on my toes, to be ready for anything. And here at the Carter Center, it's no different. The fast-paced environment has taught me to always be flexible and ready for what's about to come. Now, when I first came to the center, I was told I was going to focus solely on Honduras and in Latin America. Within about a month, my focus had shifted from Latin America to Africa, primarily the Zambia general elections. Throughout my internship, I often had to quickly shift my focus from one project to another, and very often from one country to another. And while this was the most challenging part of my internship, I have to say that it was the most exciting and the most fun. My experience here at the center has been extremely well-rounded. I was able to get a taste for various aspects of international affairs and election observation missions. In high school, the Carter Center inspired me to pursue a degree in international affairs. My internship just reinforced that idea. I want to use the knowledge I acquired here to continue to strengthen democracy worldwide via free and fair elections. I came back for a second session because I wanted to see through what I had started. I wanted to see through the projects in both Zambia and Honduras. The work we do here, the work that I was lucky enough to be a part of, is so important and gratifying that I just needed to see the results. I truly believe that the Carter Center is doing good to the world, and I wanted to be a part of it till the end. On behalf of myself and my fellow interns who could not be here today, I would like to thank the Carter Center for providing me with this incredible opportunity, for helping me grow both academically and professionally. I wanted to give a special thanks to both of my supervisors, Andrea and Carlos, for trusting me and sharing your expertise. You made my internship extremely memorable. It's been an honor to be here at the Carter Center, and I only have you all to thank for that. Thank you so much. Ashley.
Good morning. My name is Ashley Brookins, and I'm an intern with International Principal Development this semester. Since 2018, I have been working towards my Master of Public Administration at the Andrew Young School at Georgia State. For the past 7 years, I've been a pastor at United Methodist churches both here in Atlanta and in Charlotte, North Carolina. Years ago, I graduated from Duke Divinity School thinking I'd be a pastor for my entire life, but things change. One of the biggest changes was having a baby girl. I have a 17-month-old daughter named Talia who is silly, beautiful, and wild. In the American South, we have a saying that fits her perfectly. She is whiskey in a teacup. Friends, I am an altruist to my core. I believe that we can and must make this world better and kinder. And I suspect you're here because you believe that too. Right now, I'm in the middle of changing career fields. My experience here at the Carter Center has helped me narrow down what I want to do in my future career. In pastoring a church, I've always believed in strengthening communities. In my public administration classes, I've loved my classes on nonprofit leadership, organizational behavior, and thoughtful management strategies. Now, I applied for this internship because of my interest in nonprofit organizations. The work that the International Principal Development Team does involves calls with people all over the world, and I've loved their unique perspectives. This work requires care. Through this work, I've seen the importance of strategic partnerships. You all know how important our partners are to the work that we do. We would not be able to wage peace, fight disease, or build hope without our partners. Now, before coming here, I had never heard of the Rosalynn Carter Fellowships for Mental Health Journalism. Y'all, I am in awe of this program, and I'm so fortunate to support it through my work. One of the highlights of my time here has been listening into calls with a new country that we hope will join our program in the coming year. Globally, there is stigma and shame around mental health, and yet every single person is touched by it. I love that this organization is fighting for mental health on a worldwide scale. Through online meetings with partners, writing proposals, and drafting reports for our international funders, I've had a front row seat to see how vital field work is to tell our stories and get support for them. You've heard the saying that many hands make light work. Well, here I believe many hands make better work. It changes lives. The work that the center does requires aptitude and attention to detail. My experience here has been so helpful for me to clarify what I want to do in my future career. I'm inspired by the good that this organization does because you make the world kinder and better. It's amazing to me that we do not go into faraway lands with colonialist attitude. No, instead we go where we are invited. We create or build on established networks of locals who feel the mission in their bones and they work to make it a reality. We gather international partners like the World Health Organization, UNICEF, governments, funders, and community leaders to make our mission a reality. Here you can see President and Mrs. Carter with the late Sultan of Oman, who was a faithful supporter of our health and peace programs. Democracy and peace are fragile in parts of the world like Ethiopia, Sudan, and Haiti. Yet our people go, even when the situation is precarious. To see how the center often uses its achievements in health to advance peace or engage in dialogue around peace as an avenue to promoting health, this is truly inspiring. This link, first inspired by President and Mrs. Carter, is a lasting legacy that makes this world better and kinder. The networking opportunities to connect with your staff have been invaluable to me. Since my internship here has been mostly remote, I've appreciated the happy hours at the koi pond and conversations with our staff and the cookies baked by Paige. It's been delightful. In closing, I want to express my gratitude to all of you for what you do to make this organization thrive. Thank you to Paige for your time with our interns. We appreciate it. Thank you to Lauren for leading us and gathering us. Special thanks to Curtis Kohlhaas and Megan Martz, the International Principal Development Team, for your patience in teaching me how to do this work with heart. Having learned and grown through this internship, I know that the center will have a lasting global impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, Ashley, and Bernardo. It's great whiskey in a teacup. That's awesome. I think it just reminded me of something personal a few months that my wife and I experienced a few months ago. I have a 12-year-old. His name is Beckett. And I feel like pastors, priests, ministers, imams, they have this gift for putting life's challenges in context. And so in our case, when we were talking about Beckett, this pastor looked at us and said, "You asked God for patience, and he sent you Beckett." and so I think that your experience as a pastor will come in handy as you continue to pursue your career and do work for the Carter Center and other organizations in your life. So thank you again for the work you're doing. Congratulations on your internships, and really appreciate everything you've done for and on behalf of the Carter Center. So our next speaker is Paige Alexander. Paige joined the Carter Center as the CEO in June 2020, continuing a distinguished global development career with over 2 decades of experience spanning the government and nonprofit sectors. I've known Paige for several years, and the Carter Center is very fortunate to have landed her during a global pandemic, given her skill set and experience. She's innovative, she's creative, and she is incredibly impatient, 3 key traits that are necessary to advancing public health in a rapidly changing and a dynamic world. Not just public health, but obviously all the stuff around civil society and democracy as well. She has held senior leadership positions at the United States Agency for International Development, otherwise known as USAID, overlapping 3 separate presidential administrations. She has enjoyed the pressure of going through 2 Senate confirmations for her roles at USAID, leading first the Europe and Eurasia Bureau and later the Middle East and North Africa bureaus. In both positions, she oversaw thousands of employees, programs in over 40 countries around the world, and more than $2 billion in budgets of U.S. foreign assistance. Between her assignments with USAID, Paige was Senior Vice President and European founder of IREX, an international civil society, democracy, and education nonprofit. And immediately before we lured Paige back to Atlanta and the Carter Center, she served as the executive director of the European Cooperative for Rural Development in Brussels and Amsterdam, where she worked to improve the livelihoods of farmers, families, and communities in Africa. As many of you know, Paige is an Atlanta native, but has traveled and lived around the world for 35 years before Atlanta and this job drew her home. On a more personal note, Paige and her husband, Steve, are close personal friends. Her father, Miles, a lifetime member of the Board of Councilors, is a mentor and former law partner of mine. Her brother, Kent, and her mother, Elaine Alexander, have provided me with wise counsel and mentorship over the years. Elaine, in particular, has provided not only wise counsel, but very tough counsel as well. So it's a real privilege and honor to bring my good friend, Paige, to the stage to share her insights and words of wisdom with all of you.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here today. I had joked with Sham at one point when he had talked about mentioning my family. I was like, don't leave out my mom. He's a wise man, as many of people know my folks. So I wanted to start talking about what I'm really thankful for this year. I'll say on top of Sham being our Board of Counselors and really helping me, our chair, get me comfortable with this type of setting. We've now gone from no one in the audience and everyone virtual to having a room full of people today, which is great, which I know it's not the same room full of people that we had pre-pandemic, but it's really nice to have people here. I'll also say I'm thankful for standing on the shoulders of so many who did come before me, whether it was John Hardman, who I spoke to this week, or Marianne Peters. It's also the founders. President and Mrs. Carter have done such an amazing job at setting a North Star for us in looking at global health and peace. Who would have known certainly when I took this job or accepted the job in February 2020, that these would be the predominant factors that the world would be faced with for the next 20 months. I will tell you, the Peace Health Nexus, as Ashley had mentioned, is such an important part of what the Carter Center does. You know, whether it was when President Carter helped negotiate the Guinea worm ceasefire in Sudan so we could get our health folks into endemic areas that were dealing with Guinea worm in the middle of a civil war, or whether it was in Liberia during Ebola when we were able to talk to village leaders and religious leaders about different burial habits so the spread of Ebola didn't continue, to what we are currently doing in Mali with our Peace Health Nexus in both Mopti and Tinuku. These are areas that really make the Carter Center stand out in a way that other nonprofits don't. I was able to take my first business trip that was not just to Washington, D.C., but was overseas. I went to Geneva, and that was a perfect example. I spent an entire day at WHO talking to Dr. Tedros, who was quite busy, but given his relationship with the Carters and with the Carter Center, we had a lot of discussions about the work that we're doing. I was with Dr. Kashif-Vijaz, who is our Vice President for Health and came from CDC. We were the first visitors allowed back in WHO after 17 months. We were the first international delegation, and that was a wonderful experience for us to talk again about how we see health being relevant, not just within the pandemic, but everything that is being left out with neglected tropical diseases, with mass drug administrations, the things that have been the collateral damage of the pandemic. And then I spent the next day with Barbara Smith, our Vice President for Peace, working with the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights. They are the UN High Commission for Human Rights. President Bachelet is going to be looking domestically at the United States. This is not something that we would have assumed 20 months ago, that the UN would feel a need to look at human rights domestically, and we at the Carter Center stand in a good place to be helpful and to house somebody coming in and looking at this because of our human rights work. So this was a perfect example of the nexus, both at the policy level and at the on-the-ground level for our work. I will say that I'm also thankful for all the innovations that we've had at the Carter Center. Just since I've been here, we just signed an agreement with the Gates Foundation to look at river blindness and geospatial modeling for predicting blackfly habitats. These are things that really are going to change the way we are fighting neglected tropical diseases, because we can go to the crux of the matter through some of these innovative techniques. We have a long-standing relationship with pharmaceutical companies like Merck and Pfizer, who are obviously very busy doing other things right now, yet they continue to give us the assistance that we need, and this for the mass drug administrations, as well as our donors and our supporters and people like you all who are talking about what the Carter Center does and the special place that we hold. I will also tell you from my own journey, it has been quite interesting trying to build a team in the middle of a pandemic, trying to build folks virtually. Ashley referenced my cookies. I decided, being a mom, I know that if you feed people, they eventually come. And so we've been doing happy hours out by the koi pond, and we just reopened November 1st. So we now have staff coming in with very flexible work schedules. Speaking about flexible work schedules, we might be moving this morning meeting from a 7:30 start time to a little later. I think that was very much pre-pandemic. Definitely claps in the audience for that one. We have really worked now. We have a wonderful 37-acre campus. It's great that folks are able to come in and spread out and be socially distanced. but we're going to be in this for a while. So restarting and being a CEO in the middle of all this has been something that I am thankful for. I'm also thankful for the staff and the experts that we have who have really helped me figure out how to read a Lancet journal like as an evening read, and it's actually become quite interesting as our epidemiologists have been have been writing things in academic journals. These are things that I am learning. I have always been a little bit of a policy wonk, reading the coup-cast and trying to figure out where the next coup is going to be and where we're working. The Carter Center is in all of those places, and it's because of our experts, and as Bernardo had talked about, the fact that people are willing to be flexible and adaptable. That has made us stronger during COVID, and for that I'm incredibly thankful. And I'm also thankful for Jason, who I'll bring up here in a little bit, but for the fact that the Carters and the Board of Trustees have allowed us to work domestically. As Helen talked about, all of our work on the domestic front with mental health, because Mrs. Carter started this 50 years ago, and it is something that we enjoy talking about now and enjoy working on, but there are other domestic issues and priorities in the world as we look at our conflict mitigation and resilience work. Elsewhere, we're starting to look at it more in North Carolina and Arizona and Florida and Georgia. These are places that we want to be able to bring people together just like we do in the villages, in some of the smaller places that we work in some of the larger urban centers like Venezuela and elsewhere. This is a really important part of what the Carter Center is doing to innovate. So I thought I would show two videos. The first video being a little bit of a follow-on to the September Board of Councilors meeting we had, where we were talking about the digital threats, and this will give you a sense of how we have moved internationally and domestically. So let's tee the first video.
The Carter Center started its digital threats work in 2019 through our democracy programs. It was becoming increasingly evident in our election observation and broader democracy work that it was impossible to disentangle what was happening online from what was happening in the physical world.
We're talking about online disinformation, hate speech, cyber attacks, cyber surveillance, and internet shutdowns.
The Carter Center has done digital threats work first in South Africa, where we did a pilot mission for their most recent national elections. And we've gone on to do work in Myanmar, Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, and we've done some initial work in South and Central America.
We typically partner with local organizations that understand the threat landscape, and we transfer the knowledge and tools necessary for them to identify, analyze, and mitigate threats. In Ethiopia, we collaborated with Georgia Tech to provide training and tools to enable a local partner to monitor and identify disinformation and hate speech in real time and flag content for Facebook. We partnered with NewsGuard to analyze the dissemination and spread of content by misinformation repeat offenders on social media during the 2020 U.S. elections. And we proposed recommendations for concrete steps that platforms could take to preserve freedom of expression while mitigating potential harms.
We'll continue to work to mitigate and fight against those digital threats that we see in the world, whether it's through our democracy programs, our human rights programs, our rule of law work, or our work in conflict resolution.
Fighting against digital threats isn't about necessarily solving the problem, which sounds cynical, but I don't mean it that way. It's that just as in any other field, as we get better at combating digital threats, the people in the interests that are very powerful who are attempting to distort this space will continue to innovate as well.
It's critical that we start to really address this as a society. It's not going to get better, it's only going to get worse. The kind of work that we're doing can reduce the impact of disinformation that could destabilize democracies, fortify defenses against cyber attacks that could undermine legitimate governments, and deter actors who seek to silence human rights defenders and perpetrate violence.
Great, so I would encourage everyone to look at our website. We have the repeat offenders report that we launched. This is something that is actually a really important part of, again, the policy and the advocacy piece, as well as how we are working at the community level. So that is a great report. The second video I want to show is also, it really does get back to our roots. It talks about the work that we're doing in Ethiopia on guinea worm. And again, a differentiator I felt from the Carter Center when I came in during the pandemic is the fact that we did not have to bring loads of people back to Atlanta. The reality is that we have almost 3,000 people overseas, and they are all community workers. They are people who, not all of them, but almost all of them. I'd say we have about 12 who are actually third country nationals, but the rest of them are the people who work in the community. And the fact that they were able to keep these projects going, this is a perfect example. So let's shoot over to that video.
Youth ambassador and na gwa
The youth ambassadors, what they do, unique from what the adults do.
Gumwa twapeng na magchi wali pona ba magchi berebe. Gumwa twapeng tepat na gamu de pina ga magchi wala gaji ku nyimigre na ba magchi ne berebe tere.
We do tell them that let them not leave the dog without checking it. They have to check every dog. And we also tell them that they need to take the dogs to the dog park for the exercise. Because if the dog is just kept at home without taking it to the dog park, it will not be healthy anymore.
Bugun bere da mema kan rolo reda auto blank care paj blank pour blank.
The young guys are really performing that dramas for the community. Community are interested in it. They like it because that will even show them that the way you tether your dog and the way that you tether the cats. So this one, people are coming to learn for them to know. Then you will copy from that drama and put it in a practice.
Na bajang mau kit gumo to na bajang tau she mau kunya wa na bajang che mau ko te po na be madam mak che de amer ku gumo de na bapara war.
So I think that also gives us a really good idea of what has happened with guinea worm. As we went through this process and it jumped from humans to animals, we had to find the best way to address that. And this was using the community volunteers. We are now down to 14 guinea worms left in the world. This will be the second disease, human disease, ever eradicated, and all with behavior change. This has nothing to do with pharmaceuticals. This is something that is really exciting. So this time last year we were at 27, now we're at 14 human cases. We were down about 50% in animal cases as well. So we have spent the pandemic cutting these numbers almost in half over the last 20 months. And this is because of the people that we work with. So I just wanted to give you a sense of that, and I decided to spare you from the guinea worms exposure this early in the morning, but if you have any questions or thoughts about that, please go online. You can see other videos that we have at the Carter Center. So let me invite Jason to come up. Also, I'm seeing Meredith, and it reminds me that the library and the museum is now reopened. So as you might have people coming into town, I would highly recommend Tuesday through Saturday from 10 to 4. You can get time tickets online, or if they still have spaces, you can come in and just buy them online while you're there. But let me have Jason come up and talk a little bit about his grandparents. We just saw each other at an Emory event last night, so it's a typical Atlanta thing. Pieces are getting back together, and we're getting a chance to overlap. So,
thanks, Paige. I just want to note that one of the things that we're all thankful for is how great a job Paige is doing. And she says that it's been difficult to build a team during COVID, but the team that she has built with a new director of our health programs in Dr. Ijaz, the new director of our peace programs in Barbara Smith, and the way that Paige and that team was able to, for example, walk into the World Health Organization as the first visitors with enormous amounts of respect from the international community, walk into the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights with an enormous amount of credibility and respect for that group of people. It just demonstrates, number one, how great the track record of the Carter Center is and the respect that it has, but how wonderful a job Paige and her team are doing of carrying that on. I also want to mention briefly, we had this Emory Town Hall last night. And last night was the 40th Carter Town Hall. I see Amol Naik Sham, a lot of other Emory alums around who've participated in that event over the years. It was something that was super important to my grandparents and to my grandfather in particular. And I call it a joke because I think it's funny, but it wasn't a joke. When he would fly back into the United States for the last 40 years, he would have to fill out a customs form like everybody else, and he would always put an occupation, he would put professor. And I guess that's probably right, but I mean, it was this Emory professorship that he'd had, and really the reason he got to call himself that is because he conducted this town hall every year for 40 years. But last night, my grandparents are fully and completely retired in Plains, and as I mentioned last time, we were all here, but last night, Andrew Young was the first non-Carter speaker and sort of special guest at the town hall, and he's going to be 90 this year. And there was about a 6-minute part of his talk last night that's one of the best 6 minutes of public speaking that I've ever heard. And it was in response to a question about Martin Luther King. And you could just see and feel like the power that Andy Young felt about how history and the spiritual reality of life has sort of carried him through this world. And I'm going to bring this right back to the Carter Center, and if you've heard Andy talk about this before, he often says that, he has lived this life in essence as a leaf, being blown by God's wind to wherever it is that God wanted him to go. And I think that is 100% true about Jimmy Carter as well. And yesterday, in addition to the Emory Town Hall, we went to the Task Force for Global Health, where they're doing a tribute for Bill Foege, who was the leader of the smallpox eradication program along with Don Hopkins, but also just walked into my grandparents' life one day and said, you've got this great platform, you're president of the United States, you're looking for things to do. I think you should tackle neglected tropical diseases. And in a couple of them, there's things that can be eradicated. And we think guinea worm disease can be eradicated, but you're going to have to generate the political will. You're going to have to go into every little village in Nigeria and every village in eastern Mali and southern Chad and convince people to change the way they collect their water, convince people to do this. And you're going to have to do that with the type of respect that you, Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter, have shown to people in tiny little villages for your whole life. And building on that respect, they encountered it. And what that has turned into as this leaf has blown on sort of that God's wind that Andy Young talks about. We've now built more dog parks in Africa than any other organization in the history of the world. And if you told us that even 3 years ago, we would have said, what are you talking about? But as we said, less than 14 human cases in southern Chad and in western Ethiopia, there was this, and in South Sudan to some extent, this for the first time increase in animal population. And so in order to eradicate this disease, one of the things that we have learned as we have pushed forward towards true eradication is there is no zero other than zero. And in order to get there, they've done it with smallpox. The reason that it's difficult is that there's so many things that can happen that make it not zero, that it's remarkable. And this increase in guinea worm disease among dogs that it then allows it to jump to humans has made the Carter Center hire this enormous veterinary process, go through these things. And what we've found, again, is that the best answer to these problems comes from people like the one that you saw, 12-year-old boys who are out there loving on these dogs and can, if they want to, get trained to inspect the dogs, to find the guinea worm disease, to ensure that the dogs don't get it, and then they're the ones that lead their communities through this process. And it is totally remarkable, and every time I speak about it, I think about this picture of my grandfather as this 12-year-old boy in this tiny little village where nobody had ever heard of before, that was in the middle of nowhere, and he's barefoot, and he's standing behind this donkey. And I think that is the person that became president of the United States and started this, and that is this kid who's eradicating guinea worm disease. And I think that especially in these days right now, in my grandparents' life and in the life of the Carter Center, just things are coming together in a way that demonstrates the power of this idea that individual people, no matter where they are, no matter where they live, can make a difference in their own lives, and gets demonstrated over and over again. So I just think it's remarkable, and I appreciate that. So we're happy to take questions, mostly hopefully for Paige or the folks who actually know what they're talking about with respect to these programs. But I'm honored to be here. We're really glad to see everybody. As Paige said, it's nice to be back in person, even if it is too early in the morning, as we've discussed.
So great. So we want to open it up for questions. You don't have to go anywhere. You can stay up here. Okay. Yes. Mr. Langford.
Thanks so much. I'll definitely reach out to him. Sounds like he's got a lot of expertise that we could learn from. So. Yeah,
I'm just realizing that if you don't speak with the mic, I'm not sure our listeners online can hear. So the question was about Vietnam and about unexploded ordinances. So thank you, Mr. Langford.
Appreciate that.
No, oh, they can hear? Okay. Oh, you have to speak to a mic stand.
We'll just repeat.
Please,
Dot, why don't you ask your question, and then I'll make sure everybody can hear it.
Okay, well, I can speak everybody to hear.
I'm pretty sure that's always been true about you, Dot.
But I understand how important Parity is to Rosalind Carter. I remember how we have supported her through this. It's knocked on the door the first time and asked Jimmy Carter what he was going to do about it. Do you want us personally to contact Senator Kirkpatrick and Representative Cook?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for offering that. Well, there are two very important state legislators on mental health issues, and they have both expressed support for Parity. I would love for you to contact them, as well as for everyone here to contact your own state legislators, the senator and representative who represent you based on where you live. Please do, yes.
And we would just say, Dot.
In your pamphlet here, so they're the ones that you particularly think it's important to contact them, correct?
They're showing leadership on mental health, and they have supported this issue. So you can thank them, actually, for prioritizing this topic. Yes.
We can thank them.
Yes.
And you can do whatever you want. We, of course, don't advocate as a 501c3 about any of this stuff other than the way that we're supposed to under the law, but you should definitely do what you want to do out there. You can tell that one of the things about being a lawyer is, number one, during COVID, everything shut down, and all of a sudden, every single person that I know who's practices law is crazy busy right now, so I apologize for being a little bit distracted, but also I'm still being a lawyer up here, Dot. But I'll say one other thing about the mental health, and I know that we talked about this before, but Dot Paget was there, as she mentioned, 50 years ago, when my grandmother's mental health advocacy began, and the transformation over the last 50 years in how that issue is treated. And I see it. In fact, my son Henry just is in 9th grade and just published his first little article in the Midtown Southerner newspaper at his little public high school here, and it was about social and emotional learning and how important mental health was and all that stuff. And I thought, wow, like that's, carrying on the family tradition even more. But in any event, that 50 years of advocacy is something else that we're celebrating and celebrated last year and this year. It's truly remarkable.
Martha, would you?
Do you mind? Yeah,
do you
thanks,
mind?
Martha.
Thanks.
I don't think, it is on. Paige, I would love to hear a little bit more about your domestic work, and particularly in I guess, gentle speech and healing the divisions, and perhaps tie that into the cyber threat work, and where you're headed on that. It's big problem, big issue, and it's here at home.
It is a big problem, and it is a big issue. And Jason will remember when we, trucked down to Plains and sat down at your grandparents' and had a conversation about, what are we saving for? Are we saving for a rainy day? And President Carter said yes. And I said, well, it's pouring outside now. We really have to do something. It is the time to get involved. So we were, as many of you know, the only nonpartisan registered people allowed into the audit here in Georgia. So we were part of that audit. We were part of overseeing the counting. And from that, we have had a great relationship with the Secretary of State. We've had a great relationship with many secretaries of state now throughout the country. We'll have a virtual event as part of the Democracy Summit, President Biden's Democracy Summit, that will be talking about the democracy in the U.S. so we can make sure we hold a mirror up to ourselves. I would say for our domestic work primarily, we have looked at expanding our conflict resolution program. We're doing conflict resilience networks, as I said, in North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, and Georgia. We have community leaders that we're bringing together to have peaceful conversations to find where there is that everything is so polarized, but where can we have those conversations? We do it through faith leaders. We recognize, much like we're talking about the community health volunteers on the ground in other countries, we can't do this from Atlanta. We can't come in, we can go into Liberia with Carter Center shirts on and everyone really respects the Carter Center as an international election observer. But we can't go into North Carolina or in Georgia with a Carter Center shirt on and not be seen as blue, not be seen as Democrat. So we have to do this through local community workers. So we are doing it in those places. We are also training nonpartisan observers. So if there are other audits like we saw in Georgia, if that ends up being the way that we go, that we actually have people who know how to do the audit, how to manage the audit, and how to report out on the audit. The repeat offenders report, which I talked about, looking at our digital programs, that is the digital footprint of the U.S. and how these conversations are happening, and being able to link with Facebook and link with others to talk about policy reforms. That's an important piece. And we're also doing our own, during this racial reawakening, we are also doing our own social justice in the arts. We're looking at those different pieces because I think this is all part of the conversation. And if President Carter did nothing else, it was definitely part of conversations that he tried to encourage and that we're carrying on.
And I would just point out, Martha, the other thing that we are doing that I think is just crucially important is, as a nonpartisan organization who desires to have and maintain that, we have to build partnerships, and we've done that with a huge number of people. And the work that we did during the last election with the George W. Bush Center, the McCain Institute, Freedom House, some of these other right-leaning or just right-identified organizations has been really valuable. And just knowing that there's people out there on both sides or all sides or neither side of these political divides in the country that are willing to get together and have these conversations is crucially important. So we're doing that grassroots wise, but also at those top levels. Please, I'm happy to keep talking about this.
Have you taken it so far as to think through what sorts of policies we should have for the social media companies to be accountable for what's going through their system. Do you have some ideas about what that legislation should look like that maybe we can lobby for?
We would never encourage you to lobby. That's not something we do. Got the lawyer standing here. No, well, I'll let Jason answer a piece of that. I will tell you some of the connections we've made with Facebook and others are a really important part of what we're doing. The partnerships that we have, as Jason was saying, are also a really important part because we have a relationship now with Rally for Democracy and a couple of other groups. We'll be doing a code of conduct and we'll be pushing that out. We did that here in Georgia, but we're going to be pushing it out across the U.S., working with secretaries of states and working with election officials to try to get people to sign off on that. And so those are some of the pieces that we're doing, but you look like you want to answer.
Yeah, no. I just would say, two things. Number one, that is a very hard problem. And it's a very hard problem because all of us want the right policies and not the wrong policies, right? I mean, and we confront, just one of the barometers that I have been lucky to be on this Rhodes Scholar Selection Committee for the last 5 years or so, and seeing sort of some of these great, remarkable students who come in. We did it 2 weeks ago, and what's on their minds as we do interview 14 people a year for 2 spots, right? And what's on their minds is always an interesting barometer of sort of where sort of the brightest young folks are. Every single person in their interview talked about how we need to regulate social media. Every single person of the 14, whether they were biochemists or whether they were, violinists, they wanted to deal with the fact that there's misinformation on social media. And that, you can all see, is a scary way to go sometimes, right? We've got to be very careful. The advantage that the Carter Center has is sort of twofold. One is we confront misinformation on social media in Liberia, right? It doesn't have to be just a United States perspective. And I think that international perspective, when we were in Liberia just in 2017 even, the 90% of all the news that people get is on their phones. Just like it is in the United States. And so you can look at what this looks like, not just through the lens of the United States and what's happening here, but through the lens of the much broader sort of fundamental understanding of how democracy interacts with that type of information provision and gathering. And so we have that perspective that we can offer to the discussion. And then number two, I think just like everybody else, we can maintain sort of some credibility and skepticism of too much regulation versus not enough, and what it means to start going in and saying, yeah, I think that's an okay thing to say, and that's not an okay thing to say, where you've got real serious, what we would call First Amendment problems, but what in other countries they would just call just fundamental democratic values about how we're going to restrict people's right to speech and all that other stuff. It is a very complicated issue, and I think we do have a unique role to play in it, but it's one that I think folks are really trying to struggle with, and we have our voice that we're going to continue to add to it. And we have done and published some information about what we think can be done globally as far as sort of fundamental democratic values, and then you can confront those things in the American context sort of from that base, and that's the way I think we're approaching it. But.
Absolutely. Other questions? Anyone else? All right. Well, we'll give you a few minutes back. Thank you again. Thank you for everyone who is here. Thank you for everyone who's joining us online. Let me hand it back over to Cham, who I thank very much for all of his work as well.
Thank you, Paige and Jason. It's such a pleasure to be serving in a leadership position alongside 2 close friends, both of whom are making the world a better place than we found it. I just wish I had the same oratory skills as this tour de force over here and the same extemporaneous speaking that Paige has. Before I close out, I'd like to highlight some of the other work the Carter Center is doing to advance humanity. Having monitored 113 elections in 39 countries, the Carter Center is on the front lines of preserving democracy and advancing civil society. Through that work, the Carter Center is ensuring that all people are afforded basic human rights. Peace programs include the Conflict Resolution Program, the Democracy Program, the China Program, the Human Rights Program, the Latin and Caribbean Democracy Programs, and the Rule of Law Program. And when the center's staff isn't trying to save the world from authoritarians and dictators, they're laser focused on eradicating guinea worm and lymphatic filariasis, controlling trachoma, promoting behavioral and mental health, and eliminating river blindness, just to name a few. 3,000 people strong, the Carter Center is the world's preeminent public health and peace institution. You heard earlier about the various things that we're doing on the ground, and when it comes to execution, there is no better organization when it comes to peace and public health. In fact, I have said this numerous times to both Jason and Paige. It's too bad the Carter Center wasn't put in charge of dealing with this global pandemic, because I'm absolutely 100% certain we would be much further along, especially since the progress and success is tied to behavioral change, is tied to vaccination programs and other execution-related work. So, with all that said, I would be remiss if I didn't thank the 3,000 plus folks who work at the Carter Center, all of whom I'd characterize as diplomats, peace ambassadors, public health heroes, and guiding lights. Without their tireless service, especially 2 years into a global pandemic, many folks in Africa, the Middle East, and other regions of the world wouldn't have had their freedoms advanced, they wouldn't have had their health needs met, and their democracy preserved. Instead, they and their families have persevered and are better off thanks in large part to the work of the dedicated Carter Center workforce. So on behalf of the Carter Center Board of Councilors, it is a privilege and an honor to be on your team. Thank you for all that you are doing to wage peace, to fight disease, and to build hope. I look forward to seeing all of you, the counselors, at the next meeting on Friday, February 18th, 2022. And remember, there are only a few things that we ask of you. Number one, we want you to attend meetings and proactively support the center in those circles in which we all have influence. And then also tell somebody about the great work you heard today, and that's going on at the Carter Center. In the meantime, I wish all of you a joyous, safe, and healthy holiday season. Thank you.